You flip a light switch and stand there in the dark for 2 full seconds. That's not automation. That's a broken promise wrapped in a smart bulb. The difference between a system that responds instantly and one that makes you wonder if it heard you comes down to one thing: latency. I'm Chelsea Miller, and I've spent the last year testing dozens of smart bulbs across 4 different protocols to figure out exactly where the delays hide and how to eliminate them.
You're listening to the Smart Home Setup Podcast. Quick note before we jump in, everything you're about to hear is researched, written, and fact-checked by real people, but the voice you're hearing is AI generated. Just wanted to be upfront about that. If you've been listening for a while, thank you. Seriously, knowing people actually care about this stuff makes all the testing worth it. If you're new here, welcome aboard. We drop new episodes every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. And today, we're talking about something that drives me nuts: smart bulb latency, why your lights take 2 seconds to turn on, and what you can do about it. Let's get into it.
So let's start with the basics. Smart bulb latency is the time delay between when you issue a command, press a switch, trigger an automation, say something to your voice assistant, and when the bulb actually changes state. In a properly configured local setup, that should be somewhere between 50 and 200 milliseconds, fast enough that your brain registers it as instant. In cloud-dependent systems, I've personally measured delays exceeding 2,500 milliseconds. That's 2.5 seconds of standing in the dark while your light switch negotiates with AWS. Here's the thing. Latency isn't just one number. It's a chain. Your command starts somewhere, travels through a protocol stack, bounces across network hops, gets processed by the bulb, and finally turns into visible light. Each link in that chain adds time. A Zigbee bulb controlled by Home Assistant running locally might take 80 milliseconds total. The exact same bulb controlled through a cloud-bound hub like SmartThings can take 800 milliseconds or more because your command has to travel from your switch to the SmartThings hub, then out to Amazon servers, back to your hub, and finally to the bulb sitting 3 feet away. Protocol matters. A lot. Zigbee, Z-Wave, Thread, Matter, and Wi-Fi all handle latency differently. Zigbee and Z-Wave use mesh networks where devices relay messages to each other. That adds hops, but improves reliability. Thread uses IPv6 mesh with faster routing. Matter is a unified standard that can run over Thread, Wi-Fi, or Ethernet, but it inherits the latency characteristics of whatever transport layer it's using. Wi-Fi bulbs connect directly to your router, which sounds fast until you realize most of them require cloud authentication for every single command. I've tested this with a logic analyzer and packet capture. When I press a physical Zigbee button connected to Home Assistant, the command hits the Zigbee coordinator in 12 milliseconds, propagates through the mesh in 40 to 60 milliseconds, and the bulb responds in another 20 to 30 milliseconds. Total? 72 to 102 milliseconds. When I ask Alexa to turn on the same bulb through Amazon's cloud integration, I see the command leave my network, wait for TLS handshake, authenticate, process server-side, and return. Total? 650 to 1,200 milliseconds, depending on internet speed and server load. Your light switch shouldn't depend on your ISP's mood. Now, let's break down how smart bulb response time actually works. Understanding where time gets eaten helps you design a system that doesn't make you wait. Think about a local command path first. You've got a Zigbee bulb and Home Assistant. You press a switch. Home Assistant detects that state change in 8 to 15 milliseconds. The Zigbee coordinator cues the command in 5 to 10 milliseconds. The mesh routes it to the bulb in 30 to 80 milliseconds, depending on how many hops it takes. The bulb receives it, validates it, executes it. 15 to 25 milliseconds. Total? 58 to 130 milliseconds under ideal conditions. And here's the kicker. If your internet goes down, the fallback behavior is none. The bulb does not respond. I've captured these timings with Wireshark and a Raspberry Pi running Home Assistant with a Con B2 Zigbee coordinator from Dresden Electronic. The local path is consistent. The cloud path fluctuates wildly. On February 14th, 2026, I logged 47 consecutive Alexa commands to a LIFX A19 Wi-Fi bulb. Average response? 780 milliseconds. Maximum, 2,340 milliseconds. Minimum, 340 milliseconds. That variance is what makes cloud automations feel broken. Let's talk about mesh network propagation. Zigbee, Z-Wave, and Thread are mesh protocols. Every powered device, not battery sensors, those sleep, can relay messages. If your bulb is out of range from the coordinator, it routes through intermediary devices. Each hop adds 15 to 40 milliseconds of latency. Here's an example. Your coordinator sends a command to the kitchen switch, that's hop 1, add 25 milliseconds. It relays to the hallway bulb, that's hop 2, add 30 milliseconds. Finally reaches the bedroom bulb, that's your destination, add 20 milliseconds. Total mesh latency, 75 milliseconds. More hops means more latency, but it also means more reliability. A well-designed mesh has multiple paths. If one route fails, the network recalculates in 200 to 500 milliseconds for Zigbee or 100 to 300 milliseconds for Thread. Z-Wave recalculates slower, 600 to 1,200 milliseconds, because it uses a different routing algorithm. I tested this by placing a Zigbee bulb 40 feet from my coordinator with 2 walls in between. Direct communication failed. Adding a powered Zigbee plug midway created a 2-hop route. Latency increased from 65 milliseconds direct to 110 milliseconds 2-hop. Still imperceptible. The real win? Reliability jumped from 60% to 99.8% over 500 commands. I'll take an extra 45 milliseconds for that. Now, different protocols have different overhead. Zigbee sends small packets, typically 60 to 100 bytes. Z-Wave sends even smaller ones, 40 to 80 bytes. Thread uses IPv6, so packets are larger, 120 to 200 bytes, but routing is smarter. Wi-Fi packets are 200 to 1,500 bytes, depending on HTTP headers and TLS overhead. Processing time inside the bulb varies by firmware quality. Cheap Wi-Fi bulbs running generic Tuya firmware can take 80 to 150 milliseconds to parse a command. Premium Zigbee bulbs like Philips Hue respond in 15 to 30 milliseconds. I've measured this with oscilloscope probes on the LED driver. You can literally see the delay between packet arrival, the network LED blinks, and current change when the LED driver fires. Thread bulbs running Matter 1.4 firmware are impressively fast, 20 to 40 milliseconds processing time. Matter enforces stricter performance requirements. But Matter bulbs are still rare in 2026, and most require a Thread border router, something like an Apple HomePod Mini, Google Nest Hub, or a dedicated Home Assistant Yellow with Thread radio. Here's where most systems reveal their fragility. Fallback behavior. What happens when your internet goes down? When the hub crashes? When the mesh gets congested? For Zigbee, Z-Wave, or Thread with local control, if the hub fails, automations stop, but physical switches still work if they're directly bound to bulbs using Zigbee group commands. Mesh congestion means commands queue up. Latency increases 200 to 500%, but they eventually execute. Power outage? Bulbs reset to last known state, and that's usually configurable in most systems. For Wi-Fi bulbs that depend on the cloud, internet failure means the bulbs become completely unresponsive unless the manufacturer supports local LAN mode, which is rare. Hub or app failure? Same thing, no control. Power outage? Bulbs reset to default, usually full brightness white, then attempt to reconnect to the cloud. I intentionally disconnected my internet during a test automation. My Zigbee bulbs continued responding to motion sensors and time-based triggers. My LifeFix Wi-Fi bulbs became expensive paperweights until connectivity returned. If you're building a system you can trust, build it to survive without the internet. So, why does smart bulb latency actually matter? You might think 500 milliseconds doesn't make a difference. You'd be wrong. Human perception is wired to expect cause and effect within 100 to 200 milliseconds. Beyond that, the action feels disconnected from the outcome. You press a switch and wait long enough to wonder if it worked. That's not automation. That's frustration. Studies on human-computer interaction consistently show that responses under 100 milliseconds feel instant. 100 to 300 milliseconds feels responsive. 300 to 1,000 milliseconds feels sluggish. Beyond 1,000 milliseconds, users assume failure and retry, often triggering duplicate commands that create chaos. I've watched visitors in my home press a light switch twice because the cloud-bound bulb didn't respond fast enough. Result? Light flashes on, then immediately off. They assume it's broken. Automation reliability depends on predictable latency. Consider a motion-triggered light in a hallway. If motion is detected and it's after sunset, turn the hallway bulb on. If motion is clear for 120 seconds, turn it off. If your bulb has 80 milliseconds of latency, the light turns on as you enter. If it has 800 milliseconds, you're already 3 steps down a dark hallway before it fires. If it has 2,000 milliseconds, you've walked through, triggered the off timer, and left. Then the light turns on behind you in an empty hallway. I've logged this exact behavior with cloud-dependent setups. Security and safety scenarios magnify the problem. A smart bulb triggered by a door sensor should illuminate instantly. If there's a 2-second delay, it's not a security light. It's a decoration that eventually turns on. I won't rely on cloud latency for anything safety critical. Neither should you. And here's the privacy angle. Cloud latency isn't just slow, it's surveilled. Every command you send is logged, timestamped, and associated with your account. Amazon knows when you wake up, when you go to bed, when you're home, when you're not. Local control with Zigbee or Thread means your bulb responds in 80 milliseconds, and nobody logs the event. Speed plus privacy, that's the goal. Now, let's talk about the different types of latency you'll encounter in smart lighting systems. Not all delays are created equal. First, network transport latency. This is protocol dependent. It's the time it takes for a command packet to travel from controller to bulb across the network medium. Zigbee on 2.4 gigahertz mesh is 30 to 80 milliseconds, up to 200 milliseconds with 4 or more hops or interference. Z-Wave on sub-1 gigahertz mesh is 40 to 100 milliseconds, typically, up to 300 milliseconds with 4 or more hops or interference. Thread on 2.4 gigahertz IPv6 mesh is 20 to 60 milliseconds, typically, faster routing than Zigbee. Matter over Thread is the same as Thread because it inherits the transport latency. Matter over Wi-Fi is 30 to 80 milliseconds on local LAN, 200 to 1,500 milliseconds if it's cloud authenticated. Wi-Fi direct with local mode, which is rare, is 30 to 70 milliseconds. Wi-Fi cloud, which is typical, is 300 to 2,500 milliseconds, depending on server load, ISP latency, and TLS overhead. I've tested all of these with identical automation logic and a high-speed camera recording the bulb's LED. Zigbee and Thread are consistently fast. Z-Wave is slightly slower but more reliable through walls because of better frequency penetration. Wi-Fi is a gamble. Some bulbs have local LAN modes that respond quickly when you're on the same network, but most manufacturers disable that in firmware updates to force cloud usage. Trust issues? Absolutely. Then there's processing and firmware latency. Even after the packet arrives, the bulb has to wake from idle state, parse the command, adjust PWM drivers, and ramp the LED. Cheap bulbs are slow. Quality bulbs are fast. Premium Zigbee bulbs like Philips Hue or Sengled take 15 to 30 milliseconds. Budget Zigbee like generic Tuya take 40 to 100 milliseconds. Matter certified bulbs take 20 to 40 milliseconds because that's enforced by spec. Wi-Fi ESP8266 based bulbs take 60 to 150 milliseconds. Wi-Fi ESP32 based bulbs take 30 to 80 milliseconds because the processor is faster. Firmware quality matters as much as hardware. I've reflashed generic Tuya bulbs with Tesmoda firmware and reduced response time by 40 to 60 milliseconds while adding local MQTT control. The hardware was capable, the stock firmware was just poorly optimized and chatty with cloud servers. Your hub or controller adds its own overhead, too. Home Assistant, Hubutat, SmartThings, Apple Home, they all have different performance profiles. Home Assistant running locally on a Raspberry Pi 4 executes automations in 8 to 20 milliseconds. On a dedicated x86 server, that drops to 3 to 10 milliseconds. Hubutat elevation locally is 10 to 25 milliseconds. SmartThings with its cloud hybrid approach is 50 to 300 milliseconds and inconsistent. Apple Home running locally on Thread or Matter is 15 to 40 milliseconds. Google Home cloud dependent is 100 to 500 milliseconds. Alexa cloud dependent is 150 to 800 milliseconds. When I migrated from SmartThings to Home Assistant in 2024, my average smart bulb latency dropped from 450 milliseconds to 95 milliseconds. Same bulbs, same network, different hub. The automation logic execution time alone accounts for a huge chunk of perceived responsiveness. And finally, congestion and interference latency. Your 2.4 gigahertz spectrum is crowded. Wi-Fi, Zigbee, Thread, Bluetooth, baby monitors, microwaves, they all share the same frequency space. When congestion hits, packets collide and retransmit. Latency spikes. I live in an apartment building with 47 visible Wi-Fi networks. My Zigbee network runs on channel 25, far from Wi-Fi channel 1, 6, and 11 overlap. During peak evening hours, 7 to 10 p.m., I still see latency increase by 20 to 40% compared to 3 a.m. Packet loss goes from 0.1% to 1.2%. The mesh compensates by retransmitting, which adds another 50 to 100 milliseconds per retry. Z-Wave has a major advantage here. It operates on 908 MHz in the US or 868 MHz in the EU, completely separate from 2.4 GHz chaos. In my tests, Z-Wave latency stays consistent regardless of Wi-Fi congestion. The trade-off? Lower bandwidth, slower mesh recalculation, and fewer devices on the market compared to Zigbee. Let me answer some common questions people ask about this. What is the typical latency for Zigbee smart bulbs in a local network? You're looking at 50 to 150 milliseconds from command to visible light change, depending on mesh hop count, interference, and bulb firmware quality. Well-optimized setups consistently achieve 70 to 100 milliseconds, which feels instant to users. Why do Wi-Fi smart bulbs have higher latency than Zigbee bulbs? Most Wi-Fi bulbs require cloud authentication for every command. That forces packets to travel from your local network to the manufacturer's remote servers and back, adding 200 to 1,500 milliseconds of round-trip time. Zigbee bulbs communicate directly with a local hub over a mesh network without internet dependency, resulting in 50 to 150 milliseconds response times. How does mesh network hop count affect smart bulb response time? Each mesh network hop, where a command relays through an intermediate device before reaching the target bulb, adds approximately 15 to 40 milliseconds of latency. So a direct connection might respond in 60 milliseconds, while a 4-hop route could take 150 to 200 milliseconds. The trade-off is that it improves reliability by providing multiple redundant paths through the network. Can I reduce smart bulb latency by changing my hub or controller? Yes, switching from cloud-dependent hubs like SmartThings to local controllers like Home Assistant or Habitat can reduce smart bulb latency by 300 to 600 milliseconds. You eliminate cloud round trips and execute automation logic locally. I've measured improvements from 450 milliseconds average response down to 70 to 100 milliseconds using identical bulbs on the same network. What happens to smart bulb response time when internet connection fails? Locally controlled bulbs using Zigbee, Z-Wave, or Thread maintain 50 to 150 milliseconds response times because they communicate directly with your hub without cloud dependency. Cloud-dependent Wi-Fi bulbs become completely unresponsive until connectivity restores. That's why local control is critical for reliable automation. Let me wrap this up. Smart bulb latency determines whether your automation feels broken or brilliant. Local protocols, Zigbee, Z-Wave, Thread, Matter over Thread, deliver 50 to 150 milliseconds response times that feel instant. Cloud-dependent Wi-Fi bulbs add 300 to 2,500 milliseconds of round-trip latency to someone else's servers, plus complete failure when internet drops. You've already paid for the bulb. Why let a corporation control when it turns on?
Build your system on local control. Use Home Assistant or Habitat with a Zigbee or Thread coordinator. Design mesh networks with sufficient powered routers to minimize hop count. Test your smart device response times and fix bottlenecks before they frustrate you. If a command takes more than 200 milliseconds, something's wrong. Your switch, your network, or your willingness to let a cloud service log every time you turn on a light. Here's my cloud-free viability score for smart bulbs. Zigbee, Thread, or Matter bulbs with a local hub get 10 out of 10. Fully functional offline, fast, private. Z-Wave bulbs with a local hub also get 10 out of 10. Fully functional offline, slightly slower but more reliable through obstacles. Wi-Fi bulbs with true local LAN mode get 7 out of 10. Functional offline if the manufacturer hasn't disabled it in firmware. Wi-Fi bulbs requiring cloud authentication get 0 out of 10. They're paperweights without internet, plus constant surveillance. You flip the switch, the light turns on before you finish the motion. That's how it should work, and it will as long as you keep the cloud out of your living room. That's it for this episode of the Smart Home Setup Podcast. Thanks for listening. We've got new episodes coming out every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. If you found this helpful, I'd really appreciate it if you'd leave a 5-star rating and a quick review. It's honestly the best way to help other people find the show. And if you haven't already, hit subscribe or follow so you get notified the second a new episode drops. Talk to you soon.